Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. I have with me today Karen de Boni. I hope I pronounced it right. She is, after retiring from a satisfying career in health promotion, she's currently writing about motherhood, people pleasing, and personal growth, inspired by the experience of raising her son. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Huffington Post, and numerous literary journals. So, Karen, thank you for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. And just a bit of a background for anyone who's listening or watching. I found out about the Karen's work through a tweet that went viral, and it was about her at her book reading, and no one showed up. And the tweet got a lot of support from authors, and it went viral. And then other authors started talking about book readings and how people don't show up to book readings and how so I really love that story, and I invited Karen to come to the podcast, and I'm glad she accepted. So, Karen, thank you again.
Thank
We'll
you.
we'll get to the tweet later
Yeah,
on, but
yeah.
I want to just ask you about your book,
Okay.
your memoir.
Yep.
It's sort of about challenges and
Mhm.
overcoming them. So if you can go ahead and tell us about your book.
Sure. And I'll just say up front, so my name is not hard to pronounce, but people usually interpret it as French. So it sounds like the way you're pronouncing it is how you would pronounce it if it was a French name. It's actually Italian. And in the book, I
Ah,
talk about when my husband and I first met, and I thought it was French, and he said, no, it's Italian. And it kind of rhymes with honest. So it's de Bonis. It kind of
ah,
rhymes with honest, but it is actually Italian.
interesting.
So
Okay.
yeah, so my book, and I have a copy right here. It's Growth: A Mother, Her Son, and the Brain Tumor They Survived, and it's really and so my son was diagnosed with a brain tumor at age 11. It's really not a story about the brain tumor as much as it's a story about my shattered expectations of motherhood. I was the second oldest daughter of six children, and I babysat all the time, and my parents were good role models, and I really just thought I would be a natural at motherhood. And my first son was born healthy but very colicky for 6 months, and just challenged kind of everything I believed about myself as a mother, and what I expected of motherhood. And then when he was 8, he started having some odd symptoms. And then the story kind of becomes about this collision of medical gaslighting, which is when a doctor is not, listening to and dismissive of a patient's concerns and symptoms, and this collision of medical gaslighting and people pleasing, which is something that I was raised to be, and in part because of societal expectations, in part because of who my parents were, what their expectations were, who I am kind of innately. So the collision of medical gaslighting, people pleasing, and my son's deterioration, just that kind of, collision of everything that could, I shouldn't say everything that could go wrong, but many things that went wrong in
Mhm.
motherhood.
And well, sorry about what you went through, and what made you decide to write this down
Mhm.
and publish it? What was the motive for you?
It's a great question. I was not a writer, never
Okay.
was. I was not one of those kids who, sat in bed with a little flashlight and my notebook, writing poems or little stories. I just, I wrote. I have a master's degree, so I wrote. I could write at a professional level for not creative writing, but just for what I had to do. Um, but I had no intention of writing it, and then so my son was diagnosed in 1997, and part of the story is that I wasn't telling other people a lot of what was going on because, one, it was considered kind of typical or common, some of the symptoms for children, and because I was full of self-doubt. So when I started kind of disclosing to my friends and to some other people all the things that had gone on, the common refrain, which is very cliche, is, "Oh, you should write a book." And I was like, "Oh, not me, I'm not a writer." And then with time, within a couple years, I decided I really do need to write the story. And in part because it was kind of this crazy medical mystery with all these twists and turns of diagnoses and just this unbelievable stuff that went on. And that's actually the type of story that I like to read. But also because I saw my people pleasing and the role that it played in this whole saga of my son being undiagnosed for 3 years and therefore experiencing more damage from this benign brain tumor than he should have otherwise. I saw my role as a people pleaser and everything that happened. And I know that there are other women, especially men too, but especially women who struggle with this. And I knew that they would see themselves in my story and perhaps have their moment of personal growth where they learned how important it is to start using their voice and perhaps not go through or made the mistakes, that I made. So it was really about kind of holding myself accountable, but doing it in service of others that they would, maybe not go through what I went through.
Hmm. So thank you for sharing this. And what was your publishing journey like? Did you
Well,
self-publish? How?
yeah, I did get a small press to publish the book. So I started writing around 1999 or so, and I took classes and joined some writing groups, and I wrote for a while, and then I just stopped for a number of reasons. And I think I didn't know it at the time, but I think the story wasn't really done yet. My son was in college at that time. He was able to graduate from high school and graduate from college, but was really, really struggling, and I hadn't really figured out all the lessons of my own journey. So I put the book away for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years or something like that. And I was really committed to writing it, and I had about 300 pages done. And I just couldn't. I couldn't. I had to put it away. So in 2016, I was back at work. I had actually left work at some point because I was convinced my son would not graduate from high school unless I was really there full time to, mentor him and support him. I was back to work, enjoyed my career in wellness and health promotion, and I had some of my own health issues that made it. I made the decision that I could not work anymore. And that was really devastating because I loved my career. I was finally, for the first time in my long career, making decent money. And that was important to me, in part because I didn't know if my son Matt really would ever be able to stand on his own 2 feet. I thought we might need to support him, financially in some big way for the rest of his life. So it was hard to accept that I was not going to have an income for a while. But the day I left the doctor's office, when I realized I couldn't work, I felt this strong message from the universe saying, "This is the gift of time to write your book." And
Mm,
actually, I'd listened to one of your other podcasts. You had a guest on who had gone to prison for releasing a prisoner, and I remember her
yeah.
saying she felt that prison was a gift of time to kind of figure herself out and work on herself. I'm glad I didn't have that gift, but, uh, I just knew in that moment that I was gonna finish this book, and I thought it would take about 6 months. I was quite naive, and it only took, let's see, 7 years, because really, I didn't know what I was doing. I had so
No.
much to learn, and I just really became like a sponge. I just, every online class that I could take, I did that, because it was hard for me to get out of the house at the time because of my health problems. And thank God for the internet that I could do that. And I joined writing groups, and I found writing partners, and I just, it took 7 years to get to that point. And my plan A was to get an agent and to get a traditional publisher, hopefully a large publisher. And I had decided that I was going to query 100 agents, because that's often how much it takes. People, kind of unknown writers like myself, especially with memoir, which is considered kind of hard to sell. That's frequently what it takes. So I decided I was not going to quit until I queried 100 agents. And I got a couple of requests for full, so my full manuscript, a couple people wanted, and that was a good sign. But then I got ghosted and didn't hear anything else. So I just, let's see, it would have been like January 2022. I had gone through 85 agents, and I still had some more on my list. And I just thought, I think it's time for plan B, which is to go to small presses. So I had a spreadsheet of presses that I had been researching to, figure out what would be a good fit. And I queried about five of them, and I ended up getting two offers, and one came in sooner than the other. So I checked it out, and they seemed like they were legit. It was a university press, Loyola University, Maryland, excuse me. And, I connected with some other writers who have been published with them and were happy with the experience. So I said yes. And it was just an incredible moment to know that I was going to be a published author. It was just, something that I'd hoped for so long, but to know that it was going to happen. See, I'm getting all emotional now. You can see, just was really an incredible moment.
Hmm.
And then it took about little over a year. I probably signed the contract around February of 2022, and then my book came out May of 2023, almost exactly a year ago. In 3 days, it'll be my book 1 year birthday.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, so this is good timing.
So I'm curious, why did you opt for a small press and not self-publish?
You know, for me, it really came down to the validation. I wanted someone or some entity to say to me, yes, your book is good enough that we're going to take
Mm,
it on and we're going to make it, a reality. Where with self-publishing, and I have friends who've self-published, and they're wonderful books, well written, got tons of reviews. But for me, I just, I wanted that validity. And my plan three was going to be self-published. So I wasn't opposed to that, but
mm.
I'm glad my plan B worked out.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, that's the first time I hear the validation that
Mhm.
all of us want to feel good about our writing, and it's good
Yeah,
to hear it from someone else.
yeah, yeah.
So that's a good way of framing it. Okay,
Mhm.
so I want to talk about the viral tweets,
Yes, yes.
and if you can just tell the viewer or the listener, how did it happen, and what was the ripple effect of that
Yeah,
viral tweet?
yeah. Well, one of the things I did to market my book, and most authors, even those with large presses, are responsible for some of their book marketing. And with a small press, frequently it's completely, on the author. So
Mm,
I, again, just became a sponge and read everything I could, and, figured out what I needed to do. So I did a number of book talks at local libraries around where I live. And um, frequently I had maybe three people that showed up, or maybe five, and two of them were like my husband who came with me, and somebody else. Um, but it was important to me. I wanted that kind of hometown connection. This is where I live now in upstate New York. It's my adopted hometown, but I've been here for 40 some years. So I really wanted that connection in my own community. So I had set up a book talk in Troy, which is Troy, New York, which is where I'm living at the library. I was not living at the library, but I set up the book talk at
Yeah.
the library. And, I did some marketing and the library did some marketing, but I think in retrospect, neither of us did as much as we could have done. I know at the time I had a bunch of other events going on and marketing things, so I didn't devote the attention to it that I could have. So my husband, I call him my what do I call him? My loyal grunt, my book marketing grunt. He carries the books in and helps me get set up. We were all set up in the room and nobody came. And, we waited, 15 minutes or so. And I said to my husband, I said, I want you to take a picture. And he's like, really? Like, what are you going to do with it? You're not going to post this anywhere, are you? And I said, it happens to everybody. And I was kind of like, I was sad, but I wasn't. Some people in this whole viral tweet thing, some people said, oh, they'd be destroyed and they'd be so upset. And I honestly wasn't. I was disappointed, but I just kind of thought, well, this is just part of it. So I sat in a chair and I kind of like rested my hand on the chair, looking kind of bored. And my husband took a picture of all the empty chairs. And the next morning I posted it on Twitter. And I just said, oh, it's a bummer. Every author's got to have a no-show book talk. And I'm not on social media all the time throughout the day. I try to, limit it a little bit. And I checked back maybe at noon and it had, I don't know, a few thousand views or likes or something. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I went back an hour later and it was twice as much. And I started getting this feeling like, I think this thing is going viral. And I was thinking viral might mean like, I don't know, 10,000 views. I mean, that seemed viral to me, but it just kept growing and growing and growing. And it had over 1 million views.
Wow.
And I decided when I realized this was happening, I thought, okay, my job today is to engage with what's going on. So at least for the first day, and I'm talking like 8 hours just sitting at my computer, because I thought people were taking the time to respond and they were saying that this is the wild thing. It's not just that people looked at it or liked it. People were saying things like, your vulnerability is inspiring. That
Mm.
was one of the biggest comments. And it took me really several days to kind of process all of this and understand all of it. But I wanted to, I thought if people were taking the time to comment, I wanted to reply to them. So I probably reply, I don't know, a couple thousand people that day. I replied to every single comment that I possibly could. And I remember going to bed that night. I talked to my sister. My sister lives in Chicago. And I was like, and she's not on social media at all. And I was like, you won't believe it. There's this weird thing. I had this no-show book talk and I posted this tweet and tons. I said, it's really going viral. And I said, I'm gonna, I told her, I said, I'm gonna try to push it up to 1 million views. Like I did set that goal. I think maybe I was at 500,000 views. And I said, I'm just going to keep engaging and just see how far I can push this. But then I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and it was at 1 million.
Wow.
And, but I really think that for me, the most powerful takeaway from this experience were the comments that people, it was my vulnerability that people were responding to. And to me, that also validated the purpose for writing my book. I'm very vulnerable in my book. One of the comments that I get most is that, I'm so honest. And I just decided if I was going to write it in my book, I was going to be completely honest. And I don't always look good. I show my flaws as a mother, especially as a wife, as a woman, But I believed that in kind of laying myself bare, that other people would relate to it and other people would be able to grow. And I feel like the same thing happened in that tweet where I shared this moment and people, people said things like, "Oh, I'm so glad to see this because now I know when I have my no-show book talk, which is bound to happen, that it'll be okay, that I don't have to fall apart." Um, People said that they admired my courage, and then people started saying, "I admire your courage so much, I'm going to buy your book." And
Okay.
that was wild. So, um, yeah, just it was a really extraordinary experience. Really extraordinary.
So did you find out how many books did you sell based on the tweet?
I did. I don't, my publisher only gives a royalty check and a sales statement once a year. I have not received it yet. My book has been
Okay.
almost at a year. But I can tell on Amazon, I get an idea of the sales, and I sold
Okay.
about 44 books.
Oh,
And,
wow.
I'm honest about that too when I do some talks about book self-marketing, and that's something that I share. And I do that because I think it's important for authors to understand the reality of the impact of social media and marketing and all that type of thing. So over 1 million views on Twitter translated for me for a sale of 44 books. So that's the reality. So, you could get 1 million comments even. It doesn't mean you're going to sell 1 million
Yeah.
books,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
will sell more books than you would have sold if you didn't say anything. So,
Yeah.
I'm a believer in just putting myself out there and feeling like, people, if they see it, then that's an exposure to what I have to say. And if they see it again and again, that's often when people will act after they've, come across something many times.
Hmm. So, did you get any other opportunities besides the books? Like, were you invited to speak and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm here.
Yeah.
So here's one. Um, yeah, I did. I had a couple other podcast people reach out to me and, invite me on the
Oh.
podcast. And yeah, I think that was it. But those were good opportunities.
How many followers did you have, before you sent out the tweet?
Yeah, I had about, I think 7,000,
Oh,
and with around the tweet, I got maybe like 1,000 new followers, so I was up to
okay.
8,000 or so. So again, that's a reality check. Like I never did have a huge platform on social media. That's something that agents kind of look for and publishers look for. Um, but I worked hard to get those 7,000. I started at 0, just like everybody else, and got one at a time. And so I had that little bump there, which was nice.
Hmm. Well, this is fascinating. So,
Yeah.
what other marketing efforts you're doing to promote, or you've been doing, and what do you think worked the most for you or for your book?
Yeah, good question. And without the sales report, it's hard to say. I know other authors, even with small presses, they'll do an event and then look at the sales. Like they'll go on their portal and look at the sales, and they'll have a good kind of some data to support what they're doing. So without that, I would say that's a good question. I mean, I am on social media. Lately, it's been Facebook a lot. I'm kind of phasing out Twitter just a little bit. Um, Interestingly, I think it's the things that I do, like book talks and podcasts and things like that, but then posting them on Facebook because then people will say to me, "Oh my goodness, your book must be doing great. You're so busy." And
Mm,
I don't know that again, it's not like an equal translation, you do X number of podcasts and book talks and you're going to make, this number of sales, but um I guess I would say the key thing is just to put yourself out there, because what has been substantiated is, like I said before, people tend, they won't just see your Facebook notice of a book talk one time and buy your book. That can happen, but it's more like when they see it a bunch of times. And
Mm.
I have had people either at book talks or online say to me, well, I guess especially in book talks, I've had people say to me, yeah, I saw your book somewhere. They don't remember. It
Yeah.
could have been Facebook. It could have been, a poster up in the community about a book talk. And then I saw that it was coming to my library, so I figured I'd come. So it
Mm.
wasn't that one time exposure, it was the multiple exposures. I think that really makes a difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I read somewhere that people need like 9 exposures before they
Yeah,
actually
yes,
buy.
it's a
Yeah,
lot. It's a
yeah,
lot.
yeah.
And I can see that in myself. This is funny because, on Facebook, like once you watch a video, then of course those type of videos, like I have this makeup video that keeps showing up for me, and I've probably seen it dozens of times. And just this morning, I thought, I think I might buy that. So
Yeah.
I saw that in myself. I mean, that's really how it
Yeah,
works.
yeah, yeah. I mean, for me too. All right. So, okay. So before, I think while you and me were chatting before recording, you mentioned that you were audio recording the book yourself.
Yes.
And if you can tell me a bit about that experience,
Mhm.
and um, did you hire another publisher to do that for you, or is that through the same publisher, and how is this working for you?
Yeah, good question. Well, I was, I was still inexperienced about publishing when I got my contract. And in the contract was, there were some clauses about the audiobook and some other, versions of the book. And at that time, I, I was not an audiobook listener. I am a little bit more now, but I never even thought I would do an audiobook. That was just so far removed from where I was at that I didn't even consider it. So they basically, my publisher kept the rights. I allowed them to keep the rights to the audiobook. So then when it came time to do my audiobook, I realized, oh no, I don't have those rights. And I
Mm,
will say that I've been a member of the Authors Guild for a few years now, and I think it's well worth the membership fee. One of the things that they do is if you get a contract from a publisher, they will do a legal review of it for no
mm,
cost. It just comes with your membership. So I did get a legal review, and it was still, I've never dealt with contracts in my life, so it was still kind of a learning experience. But anyhow, so I let go of the audio rights, and I went back to both the Authors Guild, and I love to use Twitter for crowdsourcing, who's dealt with this? What do what should I do? And um, it sounded like it might be difficult to get the rights back, and I wasn't sure how to deal with that. But in my case, I heard from somebody else with my publisher. I just wrote a letter saying, wrote an email saying, hey, I'd like to, produce my audiobook. Can we have a conversation about how I can get those rights back? And he wrote back, the guy in charge of that, and said, this letter will, is the official way of saying that we're turning all the rights over to you. So
oh
bam,
wow.
it was so simple. It was so
Okay,
simple.
okay.
And so then there was a question about, do I record it myself, or do I hire a voice artist to record it? And I have to say, in all my decisions, I really, because I stopped working in 2016, I haven't had a steady income since then. So all my decisions, a part of them is a financial, what's my financial situation. So it would have been, very expensive to hire a voice artist. And I did some research and found that often for memoirs, it's recommended that the author read their own book.
Mm,
And I listened to, a bunch of samples of audiobooks, and I decided, yes, I'm going to do that. So that was one step. And then the next step was the recording space.
yeah.
Where am I going to set up a recording studio? And I could, pay to use a recording studio, which again, you know, several $1,000s and more to do that, which was really just, not something I had in my budget. So I did some research and talked to some people. And my husband, we have an old house. My husband's got a little tiny closet, and he gave me half of that closet. And I bought that foam, what do they call it? That foam egg, the egg crate foam stuff. We just kind of like stuck it all around the room. And of course, he has clothes hanging in there, which is nice it absorbs all the sounds in a good way. And it's actually, sound wise, I checked it out with someone I knew from a podcast who was a radio professional. And he said, yeah, the sound was great. So I got that settled. And then I'm recording on my laptop, but the software that I'm using is Audacity, and it's a free software. Anyone can use it. And then the one thing that I did was I hired a guy on Fiverr, which is like how would you describe that, Natasha? Because
A freelancers marketplace.
okay, thank you. Yeah. And he was someone that actually worked on my friend's memoir, and he did a nice job. So I hired him to do the editing, because the editing is very tedious and
Yeah.
also somewhat technical. You have to have some technical expertise for that. So that worked out well. I'll tell you the big mistake that I made is, and I so in my book there's a bunch of different doctors, and I was concerned that in the book I can make it clear in dialogue and in scene who's speaking, but in the audiobook I was concerned that a reader would be confused if I'm in a conversation with a doctor, who's talking, especially if it's a woman doctor. And even though I read, don't try to do anything fancy with your voice for these characters. You can actually add some dialogue tags. So, for example, in a book, in a print, book, it's clear who's talking because of the spacing and the indentations and that type of thing. In an audio book, there are a few places where I would add, he said, she said, he
Mm.
continued, whatever. So, to make it more clear. But I started messing around with the voices. So, like my husband's voice, um, this is pretty funny. So, um, it helps to, for example, if you're a woman recording a man's voice, it helps to like lower your voice a little bit. So it's kind of more clear that it's a man. But when I was recording, that didn't sound like enough. So then I was down like this recording. And I got to tell you, I listened back to it later and it was just ridiculous. So I really messed up a lot of the character voices. I had to go back in and re record almost every voice that I did. And I have 25 chapters. I was up to like chapter 20 before I realized that I had just really screwed it up. So I made a lot of work for myself. And because of all my little edits, Audacity started crashing. And then I had to get a new laptop. So again, and I want to be honest, because I think it is not easy to record your own audiobook on a lot of different levels. However, it is doable.
Mm.
And I got a lot of support on the Audacity forum who helped me figure out what was going on. So I now see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I hope to have it out. So May 2nd, which is a few days from this, when we're recording this, is my book anniversary, 1 year book anniversary. I hope to launch my audiobook then. It's not going to happen, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh wow! Best of luck.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, well, thank you for the honesty. I think that's really helpful as well for authors who are either considering recording their own
Yeah.
books. So, before we conclude, what tips would you give to authors and aspiring authors,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to being honest about the challenges and all of that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the main tips would be to get support. in whatever way works for, that particular writer or author. I did end up going to therapy in the process of writing my book, and I've been open about that because I just think it's a really helpful resource, and especially for memoir, for me it was digging up a lot of old painful memories, and so I just felt that I needed support with that. I would also say, like I said before, I became a sponge. I mean, just there are so many great resources, either free or very affordable, online. Just take advantage of every resource you can, and try to find a a critique group, or writing groups that will give some critiques, because I really feel so um, in my critique group, we started with about 6 or 7 members, and then a few people kind of went their different ways, and one person came in. We ended up with a core group of 4 people. One by one, we have all gotten a book deal. And
Nice.
we all credit each other with elevating our writing skills to the level that we could get a book deal. So, it's not easy to find a writing group, and especially one that really gels as well as mine did. I was very fortunate, but I do think that that's important. And I would advise for memoirists to find that writing, core group who are also memoirists. Because in my experience, I've been in some other writing groups with fiction writers, and I think some fiction writers don't get the vulnerability of sharing this personal story, and where to draw some lines, and where to be, fully honest. So those are the things that I would look for.
Mm. This is great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, how do people find you or get in touch with you and buy your books? Where
Yeah,
can they
thank
reach
you.
you? Yeah.
Well, my book, I'll show it again. My book is available pretty much anywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org. If your local indie bookstore or Barnes and Noble or whatever doesn't have it, they can order it for you. Um, uh, I know it's in some libraries, but again, if your local library doesn't have it and you want to borrow it, you can ask them to add it to their collection. That's like a thing. I didn't know that that was a thing before I got involved with this. So, and that's actually great for me because it's another sale if a library buys my book, but also, I really want people to read it. So it's an opportunity for people in that particular community to read it. Um, and I'm at karendebonis.com is my website, and also pretty much on all the social media handles, or all the social media handles that I have, are some version of Karen Debonis. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Great. This has been really wonderful and inspiring. And
Thank
thank you
you.
again for accepting my invitation to come on the podcast.
Thank
And
you. Well, I appreciate that you found me, and as a journalist, you ask great questions. So I
thank you.
appreciate the
Appreciate it.
opportunity.
Thank you. And for anyone who's listening or watching, thank you for joining us for another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. And until we meet again.